Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello and welcome to the course Introduction to the Psychology of Bilingualism and Multilingualism. I am Dr. R. Verma from the Department of Cognitive Sciences at IIT Kanpur. In this lecture, I will begin to talk about the aspects of language control in bilinguals and multilinguals. In the last few lectures, we have seen that bilinguals have two active language systems, both in terms of production and comprehension. Now, this leaves our bilinguals with an added responsibility of controlling inputs from these two slightly disparate, slightly distinctive linguistic systems who are constantly active and competing for selection for production, or also for competing for being mapped on to the meanings during comprehension tasks. How do bilinguals accomplish that? Because if you look around, you will find that bilinguals are extremely adept at doing this task. They are extremely adept at managing interference from their two languages. Say, for example, I am a Hindi-English bilingual, but I'm speaking in English without a lot of interruption from my native language, which is probably my stronger language, that is Hindi. Also, if you are speaking to me in either Hindi or English, which are the two of my languages, I don't think I should have a lot of problem in understanding whatever you are saying to me and mapping whatever is being said to either of my two languages. Now, this is a peculiar, situation that occurs with bilinguals and does not happen with monolinguals. With monolinguals also, in respect of formulation, if you remember the levels model that we have discussed earlier in this course, there are obviously decisions to make, but the decisions are to be made within the candidates of the same language. Say, for example, if I want to express a concept like anger, I may have several lexical candidates that can express the concept of anger to various degrees. However, the problem, as I said, sort of multiplies when I'm talking about anger, when I'm intending to talk about anger, and I have two languages at my disposal. The typical scenario that would result would be that I would have words from both Hindi and English that would, attempt to express the topic that I want to talk about, but I will have to choose which language is most appropriate for the given context in which I want to express this. So, how do bilinguals actually accomplish this? How are they able to manage the interference from their non-target language while being able to speak fluently in the target language, just as I am doing? Also, another question that we need to sort of take into account is that how are they able to comprehend, how are bilinguals able to comprehend at once words, phrases, or sentences from both the linguistic systems, never wondering which is which? This is basically going to be the flavor or the question in consideration in the next 3 or 4 lectures of this week, where I will be discussing various aspects of how this problem is actually solved with bilinguals. Now, researchers have opined that these tasks are actually managed through a complex functional system that has been referred to as the language control system, and which is responsible for allowing bilinguals, or which enables bilinguals, to adapt to the specific requirements of the listeners and the context of their conversations. Also, this allows them to manage their two language systems selectively but adeptly. And I have been saying that bilinguals are expert in handling their two languages on the fly, given different kinds of communicative scenarios, and so on. So, how does this language control system actually do that? And what are the properties of this language control system? This is indeed something that we should worry about when we are taking a course on bilingualism, because this would sort of tell us that whatever we have read so far in terms of on the chapter on comprehension or the more recent chapter on production, we have seen evidence after evidence that both the systems, or say for example if we are talking about a multilingual, three or four linguistic systems are constantly competing with each other for participating in both production or comprehension tasks. how does this language control system that we are talking about enable the bilinguals to manage this effectively? Let's dive deep into this. Now, if there is indeed such a system of language control, it has been suggested by researchers such as de Groot that the first requirement would be that, say for example, I have two lexical systems in my head. I know Hindi and I know English. The individual items of these lexical systems must be in some sense identifiable. So the idea is that words from Hindi and words from English must be tagged in a particular manner and assimilated accordingly in a bilingual's repertoire. Basically saying in more simpler words that my language system, if there is indeed a unitary one, should be able to know that which words belong to what language. So the language control system, and also the property of a particular language system should be that it should be able to determine which of the stored units in our mental lexicon belongs to which linguistic system. So for example, the first requirement is that words should be tagged. They should be, say for example, if the word is seb or kela or papita, they should be tagged with an H, for example, hypothetically speaking, or words like papaya, banana, and grape must be tagged with an E for the system to be able to sort of, and they must be in some sense embedded in separate linguistic repertoires. Or say for example, all words of Hindi together and all words of Hindi English together. So some kind of organization is required. Now once that kind of organization has been achieved or can be achieved, the task of the language control system actually becomes that it should be able to determine which input representation can be mapped to which lexical system or which lexical subsystem. So, for instance, one of the proposed ideas in this direction is that individual elements from each language are actually categorized into separate networks with strongly interconnected members of the same language group together, almost as a delineated subset of bilingual memory. So what we are trying to say here is that you can imagine a bilingual's memory as consisting of two subsets, one of Hindi, one of English, in my case, for example, and all the words that I know of Hindi are organized in one pool, and all the words of English that I know are organized in the other pool. Depending upon which language I am planning to use or trying to use in a given circumstances, you can pick I can pick, or the linguistic system or the control system can actually pick accordingly and allow me to express myself in that language. Now, more precisely, the idea is that the elements of this mental subset that we are talking about, the Hindi mental subset or the English mental subset, could actually be connected to each other through co-occurrence or through mental association. How are these things connected together? We were talking about organization in the previous slide. How does this organization come about? Now, this organization may actually come about through these words occurring together again and again. Say, for example, when I'm speaking Hindi, I'm speaking words of Hindi together, and they are sort of being linked together through co-occurrence or through mental association, because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to understand words of Hindi in terms of Hindi and words of English in terms of English, basically eventually leading to the items belonging to a particular language getting strongly interconnected with each other in a bilingual memory, since obviously, as I said, they are often used together in phrases and sentences and so on. Now, in individual lexical items, embedding within one of these languages would certainly help to determine its language membership, because it is connected in a particular way, it is organized in a particular way. So in that sense, in each lexical item from my mental lexicon can then be identified for, oh, this belongs to Hindi or this belongs to English, and so on. Further, the said organization into subsets can actually happen at the level of language membership as well as within a given language at the level of phonemes or phonological or orthographical forms of whole words. So this way, the language system that exists will be able to identify and clearly categorize individual lexical items based on where they sort of belong to, or which linguistic subset they are actually belonging to. Now, An alternative proposal to this is the idea that language membership can actually manifest through the systems of through the existence of what are called language nodes within the bilingual memory system. Say, for example, one node for each of the bilingual language. Say, for example, we have discussed some of these models in production and comprehension earlier, where you've seen that where the level of feature is common and the level of sounds is there. And say, for example, you're discussing the bimolar model in the previous lecture. So the level of features is common to both the languages, but the level of sounds and the level of words is actually language specific. So this would obviously help bilinguals to sort of classify and categorize the elements of these elements of the two languages separately. Now, if all individual lexical items and orthographical phonological forms of these items are connected to the specific language mode, they would obviously be easy to identify and retrieve when we are needing to sort of exercise them or produce them in some manner. Also, language membership could be determined by the connections between these lexical items and between their connections with items of the language node. So the idea is that a language node will be connected to all the lexical items within a particular language subset. Finally, a third alternative proposal about such an organization has been put forward by Paulies and Green, who say that a lemma representation of each individual lexical item probably can specify its membership through the kind of language tag that we're mentioning. Now, three of these proposals describing a bilingual lexical system are actually not mutually exclusive and can even be thought to coexist within the language organization of a bilingual. Let's look at this in a bit more detail. Now, the different views about bilingual language control that we are discussing or we are proposing can basically be discriminated from each other on the basis of four theoretical dimensions that have been proposed by de Groot in a book on language and cognition in bilinguals and multilinguals. The first factor here is the scope of control. Now, the idea is that these views of how the bilingual, memory or how the mental lexicon of a bilingual may be organized could be in the sense of how they practice control on the given linguistic system. The nature of control may either be global, that affects all the lexical items, or local, that it affects lexical items selectively. For instance, global control basically refers to the fact that all the individual lexical items within a linguistic subsystem are affected by the language control system in a sense that it may be able to activate or inhibit all the elements of this linguistic subsystem at once. Say, for example, if I want to speak in Hindi, I should be able to suppress all the lexical items of English at once, or if I am speaking in English, I should be able to suppress all the lexical items of Hindi at once. On the other hand, when we are talking about local control, the idea of local control would actually refer to the idea of language control in the sense that language control should be able to exercise influence on very specific or selective individual lexical items in a given lexical system. The other factor that de Groot says is might be important for us to consider is the direction of control. Now, these different views that we have been discussing about the organization of the bilingual's mental lexicon could also differ with respect to the direction in which the language control system is supposed to operate. For example, there are two very prominent hypotheses in this direction. First is the hypothesis of proactive or early control, which basically says that proactive or early control actually may manifest in a way that individuals, that when, say, for example, an individual intends to speak in a given language, say, for example, in this current setting, I am intending to speak in English, the language control system should be able to prepare all the lexical elements in English and increase their availability for selection through a system of pre-activation at the same time decreasing the availability or propensity for selection of all the individual lexical items of Hindi, which obviously might interfere when I'm trying to speak to you or trying to deliver this lecture in English. So this basically would be a concept of proactive or early control. Another proposal about the direction of control that has been put forward in research is the idea of reactive control. Now, the idea of reactive control is that the control system can operate on the outputs of the two language systems rather than preparing and proactively ensuring that what is delivered and what is not. It could basically start reacting to whatever the output the linguistic systems are bringing about. And this would basically try to prevent the items from the non-target language. Say, for example, in this specific situation, the non-target language is Hindi. So the language control system should be able to prevent the items or the outputs from the non-target language, which is Hindi at this moment, from appearing for selection when I'm trying to speak, or from being assigned a meaning when I'm trying to understand what somebody else is speaking to me. So direction of control, either proactive or reactive, is also very, very important. And we'll see in the future lectures as to how both of these manifest in order to enable control, for bilinguals. Now, the third very important component that de Groot points out is that for systems of language control is that whether they sort of affect the overall language system, basically the overall unitary language system, or it basically exerts control through the outputs of the language system. So the idea is whether it prepares the overall system or it just lets the system be, and lets the system come out with particular outputs and only acts on the output. So the locus of control is also something that is very, very important. Another very interesting aspect is this aspect of source of control. What is this source of control? Now, source of control is basically how does this issue of control emerge? How does this language control system gets roped in or triggered? Now, the source of control could be either internal or be endogenous, or it could be external or exogenous. Looking at this in more detail, when I'm talking about the source of control being endogenous, the idea is that the system would trigger itself, let's say, from an intention to speak in a particular language, where when I'm trying to speak in English, I'm consciously or let's say I'm automatically presenting an intention to the system to suppress the non-target language, which is Hindi at this current moment. Or the source of control could be completely exogenous. For example, depending upon what I am reading from, let's say, these slides or a teleprompter, would basically, and if that is switching languages, it is first coming English or Hindi and so on, it should basically, the locus of control would then be exogenous, that depending upon whatever input I am getting, say, for example, if I am reading in Hindi, it should basically try and suppress the items from English from interfering, and when I am reading in English, it should try and suppress the items from Hindi from stepping in. So the four items that the four parameters that de Groot has actually pointed out are in that sense very, very important for us to understand how these systems of language control might actually influence or enable bilinguals to sort of exercise or manage control between the two languages or three languages in case of multilinguals, four languages, from interfering with each other and so on. Now, in the next slide, or say, for example, from here onwards, let me try and sort of look at a particular paradigm, a very prominent paradigm in language control research that has been used to examine and investigate how individuals or how bilinguals actually manage their performance of speaking or understanding in the two languages. Now, this paradigm is commonly referred to as the language switching paradigm, and it has been one of the most commonly used paradigm by researchers who have been interested in investigating issues of language control in bilinguals, both in terms of production and comprehension. In experiments using this language switching paradigm, typically participants are asked to produce, let's say, name a picture or an object or a digit in one of their languages at a time, as specified by the experimenter, and then on the next trial they may be asked to switch to producing the name of the object or the digit in a different language. So for example, I could be presenting you pictures on the screen to name in Hindi, one after the other, and suddenly I say, okay, now from the next picture onwards you have to start naming in English. And sometimes this could have blocks all in Hindi at once and all in English at once, or it could be a mixed block where you have to on successive trials switch between producing in Hindi and English and so on. So this is basically what the language, what the task in the language switching paradigm is actually about. Now, if the participants has not switched their languages on a successive trial, that particular trial within this task is known as a non-switch trial, or if the participant is required to switch their language of production in the next trial, it will be referred to as the switch trial. And so there are these two types of trials which are very, very important. Similarly, in terms of comprehension, participants may be presented with stimuli in one of the bilingual languages, and the stimuli on the next trial may stay the same or change depending upon how the experimenter is actually manipulating the presentation of stimuli. Now, how in a language switching paradigm you will tell the participants that, oh, you have to name this particular picture in Hindi or this one in English, or you have to basically decide while you're comprehending, you have to decide about whether this particular word is a Hindi word or an English word. So there are both kinds of perception based and production based experiments in language switching. So it becomes very, very important for researchers to be able to tell and prompt their participants to switch languages as and when is required by these researchers. For this reason, experimenters have actually resorted to using different types of cues, some visual, some auditory, to signal the participant as to whether a given trial is a switch trial or a non-switch trial. Typically, when I have seen a lot of this research and even conducted some myself, participants actually use colored cues, colored outlines, or some kind of patterns, sometimes a beep sound, etc., to actually tell participants that, oh, if the picture is outlined with a green color, you have to name it in Hindi. If it is outlined with red color, you have to name it in English, and so on. So in this way, you can, even once the participant is doing the task, you can actually tell them that, okay, now you have to name this in Hindi, now you have to name this in English, and basically you sort of let them switch through languages across, the entire block of experiment. Now, as I was saying in the block, typically, language switching studies have employed a block design wherein first there is a monolingual block where, say for example, if I am doing a language switching experiment with Hindi-English bilinguals, typically what I would do is I would create a block of trials or pictures, say for example, that have to be exclusively named in Hindi, and the participants would know that. And then I will create a block of trials where the participants have to name the pictures in English, and that will be another block. So we typically have two pure blocks, one Hindi monolingual block and the other English monolingual block. And then the critical block here is the mixed block, wherein participants, as I told you just now, will be cued to decide whether the particular picture has to be named in Hindi or English in successive trials. So you have a monolingual block, which is a non-switch block, and you have a mixed block, which is the switching block. All right. And the pattern of switches in the mixed block or the switching block can also be sometimes random or sometimes regular. Say for example, you could basically say that every third picture has to be named in English, and and the initial two pictures have to be named in Hindi. So you can start with Hindi, Hindi, English, Hindi, Hindi, English, and so on. Or you can basically have a very random sort of a pseudo-randomized or randomized pattern of asking participants to switch in production. So you can do that. You can do the same while you are doing a lexical decision or a comprehension based task. Now, an important dependent variable for the language switching paradigm that researchers actually calculate, because now we've described the task, we should also look at what kind of results these tasks give. So typically, the dependent measures are response times and accuracies, but the important variable or an important aspect of analysis that is involved in the language switching paradigm basically is the switch cost. What is the switch cost? Switch cost is traditionally computed as the difference of reaction time between a non-switch block and a switch block. Now, it can either be done globally, or it can be done locally, which I will just describe in a moment. So typically, it has been seen that participants are relatively slower on the on trials where they have had to switch the language, as opposed to they are relatively faster when they are speaking in the same language on successive trials. Now, there are two ways, as I was saying, of computing or calculating these switch costs. Either you can calculate the switch cost locally at every single point where the switch has been made, or you can basically calculate the switch cost globally, basically by subtracting the overall reaction time from a mixed block for all switches minus all non-switches. So both ways researchers have actually used this. So while there may be different ways of calculating and computing switch costs, according to de Groot, an important advantage for computing these switch costs locally is that it would allow the researcher or allow the experimenter to compare the switch costs incurred by a switch to L1 on the one hand and a switch to L2 on the other hand. Because if you are just clubbing all the switches together and comparing them with all the non-switches on the other hand, you basically get, oh, how much time does it take to switch versus how much time participants incur when they are not switching. But something of critical interest for bilingual researchers has been that how much time does it take for a participant to switch into their L1, and how much time does it take for them to switch into their L2 or L3 or L4 also, which is possible depending on the kind of participants you are using and the kind of research questions that you have posed. Interestingly, some studies such as Mutter and Alport in 1999, which I will discuss in more detail later, actually have shown that the costs of switching into L1 as may be asymmetrical as compared to the cost of switching into an L2. So obviously, when you see that the switching costs to L1 and L2 are not similar, it makes a lot of sense for us to be able to compute the switch costs locally. Now, another very important caveat of measuring the switch costs that has been pointed out is that the switch costs, when you're measuring them globally, is actually confounded with mixing costs. Now, how do you demonstrate this? You basically look at all the non-switch trials in the mixed block, and you look at the let's say all the Hindi trials in the mixed block and all the Hindi trials in the pure language block, which is the monolingual block. And when you compare this, you will basically see that what emerges is what is called a mixing cost. Typically, participants will take a bit more time to respond even in their dominant language when it is in a mixed environment rather than when it is a non-mixed or a pure language environment. And that is also something which is very, very interesting, because it has been proposed that when participants know that they do not have to switch between languages, they actually find themselves setting into a proper rhythm of naming in the same language, let's say Hindi, or English, and that basically allows them to sort of go along with the task inertia. No suppression or activation of the non-target languages is required. However, on the other hand, in the mixed block, what happens is that they have to sometimes suppress their L1 and activate their L2, and on the other times they have to activate their L1 and suppress their L2, and basically both of these languages are highly activated because you don't know which language you have to name in. So because of all of these factors, there is a lot of competition and lot of cost incurred in terms of time in a mixed block. So mixing cost is something obviously very, very important that you have to keep into mind when you are actually looking at the data coming out of a language switching experiment. Also, there are few potential limitations to the language switching paradigm that language switching behavior that basically is tabbed through this language switching paradigm. Now, the way I have been describing that how people in some sense administer this language switching task is, let's say, by pseudo randomizing it, or by queuing the participants that, oh, you name the picture underlined with the green in Hindi and underlined with the outlined with the red in English, is basically that these switches that we are seeing here are actually unnatural. They are not a genuine imitation of the language switches that typically occur when bilinguals are operating in normal circumstances. Suppose I'm a bilingual, for example. I mean, as a matter of fact, I'm a bilingual, and when I'm talking to people, I may switch into and switch out of a particular language. Say, for example, I may suddenly start speaking Hindi if I know that the person is capable to understand Hindi, and switch into English if I know that the person is capable to understand English. So in those instances, you will see that the switching is voluntary, and the switching is in that sense that much more natural, if I may use the word. Whereas in these experiments, the switching that is induced is actually experimenter controlled, and it is not natural, and therefore whatever results and explanations we actually get out of these language switching experiments may not be highly ecologically valid. So this is again one of the drawbacks of the language switching paradigm. Also, the type of language switches that we observe in the language switching paradigm, or language switching task, if I may call it that, is that these are typically out of context. We are basically asking people to name objects or digits in isolated fashion. We are typically, mostly we are not asking them to speak long sentences, etc., which is basically totally out of context and very unnatural. So that unnaturalness of the task in itself also is bound to incur some costs for the individual, and again makes it more and more difficult to interpret the findings from such a task, and basically be able to generalize them to understand the behavior of the bilinguals. Again, while there are these limitations of this language switching task, it has been used extensively for over 2 to 3 decades, and has been one of the more popular tasks that has revealed a lot of insights about the behavior of bilinguals. To summarize, I would just say this is a blank slide, so I just wanted to for you to take a pause and summarize it for yourselves. But if I have to give out pointers for a summary for this lecture, you can basically see that it is a genuine problem for bilinguals to manage their two languages from interfering with each other, both in terms of production and comprehension, and there indeed must be some kind of a language control system that is required that allows and enables bilinguals to do this. How does this language control system look like? How does it actually enable this? And so on are questions that we will delve into deeper and further in the next lectures. Interestingly, there are experimental paradigms like the language switching paradigm that are available to us for looking at the predictions or operations of this language control system, as I am talking about it, and also to sort of reveal a lot of insights about bilingual language behavior. Thank you. I'll see you in the next lecture.